Good morning. Thank you again for coming this morning. I'm Stephanie Cronin from the Middlesex 3 Coalition. For those of you who don't know the Middlesex 3 Coalition, we are a regional economic development organization. Our role is to bring the public and the private sector together to try to address and to help business development in the region. And that's really what we're doing here today. I like to say there are hundreds of resources out there to help businesses to grow and expand in the Commonwealth. You're not going to know all of them. You're trying to run a business. That's not your job. That's my job, is to know what resources are out there. And there are many of them in the room here today as well, too. If you need help with workforce or transportation or real estate or whatever it might be, contacts, please just give us a call at any point. And we'd like to help you to expand in the Commonwealth. So there are many of the resources here today as well, too. If you didn't get a chance to talk with them earlier, hopefully you can talk with them. Hopefully you can talk with them after today's event as well, too. I know we've got Mass MEP, we've got Mass Technology Collaborative, Mass Innovation, Northeastern, Middlesex Community College, and of course, Northeastern, UMass Lowell. Oh, geez, I'm never gonna live that one down. So thank you all for joining us. We're gonna hear from Chancellor Julie Chen in just a few minutes about this great facility at UMass Lowell and their applied research facility. Thank you, Matt McSwain and Jennifer Dosanos for all your help with hosting us today. So we do appreciate that as well too. And of course, thank you to Congressman Moulton for joining us the Monday after Thanksgiving. I think we've been doing this for 3 or 4 times at this point. It's become an annual tradition. So maybe that's going to be a new, the Monday after, yeah. So thank you. And it's always been a great conversation. I learned something, and hopefully you learned something, and hopefully we all will. And the idea is really a conversation with our defense companies on what are your concerns, your challenges, opportunities, how we can work together as a region to make to improve business development, so to help you to grow in this region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chancellor Julie Chen for a welcoming.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much to you and Middlesex 3 for all the work you do in this region. And I think one of the things, since you've been doing this regularly, you know, right, the role Middlesex 3 plays in bringing together all the stakeholders that you see in this room. I want to just thank a few other folks, Ben Linville Angler and Christine Nolan from Mass Tech. One of the things that you may not know is this space, and also the space across the hall, which we call Nexus, is also in the spirit of some of the things that we talk about here, which is bringing together our DoD partners to understand what the needs are and helping to communicate with the small business, the large businesses, and the universities and government entities in this region about how do we help together solve some of the great problems that we need to as a country in terms of our defense and in terms of generally our economic development. So thanks to Mass Tech for being a great leader in that area. The other thing that I want to mention is, of course, the location that we're here at, the UMass Lowell Applied Research Corporation, is on purpose just outside the gates of Hanscom Air Force Base. And that is also part of this idea, original brainstorm from Matt McSwain, of being just outside the gates, right? The ability to come together in a free-flowing way to exchange ideas, exchange conversations, and make connections is all part of what this space that you're in is all about. So there's several folks here from UMass Lowell and from the UML ARC. Please, if you haven't had any chance to, or you have questions, feel free to reach out to them. Matt Carrera on the wall there, and Matt McSwain, and several folks in the area. The last thing that I want to say before I introduce our guest today, Congressman Moulton, is something I think that we all care about, which is workforce and talent. It is something that drives the success of the companies and the government needs in this region. And it's my pleasure to always be in partnership with my friend Phil Sisson from Middlesex Community College. And as Stephanie mentioned, the great academic institutions in this Commonwealth. We want to work with you on creating that workforce and talent to make you successful and to make our students successful. It's part of why we were proud to be announced by the Wall Street Journal as the #1 public university in Massachusetts. It's because of that student success that we're focused on. So please, if you have any questions or any need, don't hesitate to reach out. Lastly, it is my great pleasure to introduce Congressman Seth Moulton. I think many of you know his background. Harvard, served in the military. Because of that, has been a great champion for veterans, for their support, for supporting them through the VA, for supporting broadly mental health, which we all know is a huge challenge that was always there, but has been accelerated since the pandemic. He does so many things for this Commonwealth and for the country. In addition to those areas, he serves, as you all know, on the Armed Forces Committee. He's involved in things like, I think of great interest to this group, cyber, intelligence, information technology, all those areas that I think will be of great interest to this group. And in particular, I think we all know that we have challenges ahead of us, that the world is changing quickly, that there are conflicts everywhere, that China certainly is a huge competitor that we need to know and be aware of and to compete with. And we know that the competition is not, yes, it's on the battlefield, but so much of the competition is intelligence, information, technology, communications. These are the things that we need to make sure that we as a country stay ahead of. And thanks to Congressman Moulton for his leadership in those areas. It's great to have you as our representative. Congressman Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you to so many of you who came out just after Thanksgiving. You know, not everyone wants to see members of Congress these days. I feel like I'm part of the most dysfunctional team in America, aside from the New England Patriots. Sorry if that hits close to home. But what I thought I would do is try to spend most of the time on Q&A to allow you to take the conversation wherever you would like. But I'll start with just a few remarks on not, you usually come and just talk about defense industry or sort of our priorities for economic development. But given everything that's going on in the world today, I figured we'd sort of take a little bit broader view and I'd make some remarks about the conflicts around the globe, which I think are on everybody's minds. And certainly this is a place where we need leadership, and we need leadership even from Congress right now. So let me just start with that, just about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll go to your questions. So please don't hesitate to ask about the things or challenge the things that I say in these remarks, but also you're more than welcome to take this in an entirely different direction. You know, right now, we're really focused on 3 primary national security challenges around the globe. And to just put this in perspective, how serious these conflicts are right now. 1 month into the conflict in Israel, there have been an estimated 11,500 people killed. That means that about 350 lives are lost every single day. It's a lot. It's a lot of people. In Ukraine, we're almost 2 years in, and there have been over 300,000 people killed on both sides, a cost of about 375 lives per day. Every single day. And then, of course, the third potential conflict, one that I feel like I'm working hard every single day to avoid, is a potential conflict with China over Taiwan in the Pacific. If we went to war with China over Taiwan, we could expect Vietnam War level casualties in the space of a few weeks. We could wake up tomorrow with 2 U.S. aircraft carriers at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and a lot of American kids down there with them. By some rough estimates, that would be a death rate of 2,750 people per day. So a lot of lives are on the line, both with what's going on today in two wars about equidistant north and south from Ankara and Turkey, and with what could happen in the Pacific, which could absolutely become World War III. So these are some sobering statistics for a Monday morning, and I want to emphasize how serious this is so that we think seriously about solutions. We almost can get, inured to just the news every single day. So let's start with Israel-Gaza. I think it's important that in the Middle East today, we keep using our leverage not only to help resolve this terrible new war, but also to prevent a full-blown regional war in the Middle East, which I think is much more likely than people might assume. It's much more fragile. We already see the U.S. leverage at work with the current temporary ceasefire and the hostage deal that's underway as we speak. We've worked hard on trying to make that happen. As heartening as it is to see about 50 or so people reunited with their families, at least still about 200 hostages yet to go. And it's also important to point out that this ceasefire is a temporary ceasefire, which means that we're going to go back to that rate of killing when this ceasefire ends, unless we see a change in strategy. And as I've said from the beginning, and you may have read some of the pieces that I've put out, the op-ed early in the conflict on CNN.com or some other places, I've really urged Israel to learn from our experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, to understand how to prosecute what is fundamentally a counterinsurgency fight successfully. And to be blunt to the point, you're not going to win a counterinsurgency fight if you kill as many civilians as Israel's been killing. So I think Israel has not just a right, but a responsibility to protect its state, its nation, and its people. But if it just leaves Gaza a smoldering mess, we're going to be right back to where we began. And Israel's not going to be safer, and thousands more Palestinian lives will be lost. So what Israel really needs to figure out is, what is the end game? And how do you get there in a way that actually puts peace on the table? Because the only way that Israel is going to have national security or Palestinians are going to have rights, two things that should not be mutually exclusive, two things that I think are actually dependent upon one another, is for Israel to win, but to do so in a way that eliminates Hamas while actually winning over more people to their side. So there's a lot of work to be done in the Middle East, and I think this is a place where we can lean in. General McChrystal made the point in Afghanistan that they actually studied this. He had his staff study the results of civilian casualties, and they estimated that for every one civilian casualty, you effectively recruit about 10 new terrorists, 10 to 1. So that's not encouraging math right now for what Israel is doing. Going on to Ukraine, about a year ago, I made the case for continued U.S. support for Ukraine for three fundamental reasons. One, winning in Ukraine prevents future wars in Europe. Obviously, Putin has been on the march for the last decade, and if he's not stopped in Ukraine, his next stops are European countries that are under NATO, and that could mean U.S. troops, or that would mean that U.S. troops would be fighting and dying. The second reason, of course, is that winning deters other authoritarian conflicts, namely Xi Jinping over Taiwan, by showing that the West, that democracies are going to stand together, and that we're not going to let authoritarians simply declare, I want to take that territory, borders don't matter, sovereignty doesn't matter, I'm going to go ahead and take it over. We can't let that be the lesson coming out of Putin's war of choice. And then third, something that I think we don't talk about enough, is that winning prevents nuclear proliferation. If one of the lessons that people take out of a potential Russian victory in Ukraine is that you can use nuclear weapons to threaten foreign states, to threaten adversaries, that sets a very dangerous and entirely new precedent in the world. For 75 years, we've used nuclear weapons defensively. Many would argue that the presence of nuclear arsenals, as horrific as that is on some level, actually deters conflict. Russia's not going to start a war with us because they understand that the response could be devastating to them. But if the message coming out of Russia and Ukraine is that you can actually use nuclear weapons to threaten smaller countries, to take them over, as Putin is trying to do with Ukraine, then that could upend nuclear non-proliferation efforts that have lasted for generations. So I think all those three reasons for why we need to support Ukraine and eke some sort of victory out of Ukraine are incredibly important for the West, not just for America, but for our NATO allies and peace-loving democracies all over the world. But at the same time, we can't just fund a forever stalemate to the tune of tens of billions of dollars every year. And I think that whether you support Ukraine or not, I think even supporters of Ukraine have to come to terms with that fact. What I've been quietly pushing the Pentagon to do is to try to push Ukraine to adjust its strategy, because banging their head against the wall is not going to work any better today than it will tomorrow. And so we're pushing some ideas behind the scenes for how that might happen. But this is going to get more difficult on a political level in Washington if we don't see some changes and some successes in that conflict. And finally, just some comments on Taiwan. There's no one in the world watching Ukraine more carefully than Xi Jinping. And let's not forget, Xi Jinping has said to the world, I want to take over Taiwan. And if I can't do it peacefully, I'll do it with military force. This is exactly what Putin said about Ukraine. When millions of people all over the world, including a lot of U.S. intelligence analysts even, said, oh, he's not really going to do that. No, he wouldn't really be that dumb. He's not actually going to invade. But of course, he did exactly what he said he would do. So I think we're pretty naive to think that Xi Jinping is just lying. He staked his legacy on invading Taiwan, but he's just going to decide one day not to do it. So therefore, we have to think about what happens if he does invade. And if he invades Taiwan, the U.S. only has two terrible options. Really only two. The first is that we say, oh, we're kidding, we're not going to do anything. And that might sound convenient because it keeps U.S. troops out of a war. But the economic consequences of handing over all advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing to China, of letting them control the most important sea trade lane in the world, not to mention the impact it would have on our deterrence all over the globe, where countries everywhere would say, America is not serious. I think you could actually see more U.S. lives lost for not stopping an invasion of Taiwan than if we do, just because of the precedent that it would set all around the world for a generation. The second option, of course, is that we say, no, we are going to stop you, as the president has multiple times, and many presidents have implied. And then we get into the mess that I described at the beginning. And if you play out the war games, as I have with this conflict, it could very quickly become a nuclear conflict that would literally inflame the planet. That means that it absolutely is essential that we succeed in deterrence in the Pacific. And for everything that's gone right in Ukraine, a place that just about every intelligence analyst assumed would be taken over by Russia in a matter of weeks. For everything that's gone right for us there, we have to admit that deterrence failed. And we cannot allow deterrence to fail in the Pacific. So sitting on the China Committee, where we are discussing this, debating it, in one of the most bipartisan fora in Congress today, we're talking about different ways that we can strengthen deterrence. Many of you play important roles in strengthening military deterrence, and that's an important part of the puzzle, perhaps the most important puzzle, part of the piece of the puzzle. But the military thinks about deterrence not just in terms of the military realm, but in three other realms as well: informational, diplomatic, and economic. We've learned a lot about deterrence through information warfare with how the Biden administration has handled Ukraine. Deterrence failed at the end of the day, but they did some remarkable things with telegraphing to the world by quickly declassifying intelligence what Putin was about to do. That's an example of deterrence through information. On the diplomatic front, of course, we've seen some significant progress just in the last couple weeks with Biden and meeting Xi and having some substantive discussions. I was pleasantly surprised with what they were able to achieve. I think we all, or we should have at least had low expectations. But then on the economic front, which in some ways is our biggest lever, because we have an historic level economic partnership with China, there's actually a tremendous amount of debate, no real consensus at all about how we should use that leverage to prevent conflict. The title of our committee is the Committee to Examine Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. But if we come out of this committee with better plans for economic competition so that we can compete more effectively against China, which we all know we need to do. We know that they're stealing our plans, eating our lunch. If we come out with a better plan for economic competition, but it doesn't actually contribute to deterrence, then in my book, it's not worthwhile at all. So some would say that we need to accomplish economic deterrence in the same way that we deterred conflict with the Soviet Union, by essentially outcompeting China economically. And some of the economic models for where China's economy is heading right now, make that view seem reasonably encouraging. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are people who say that any amount of economic decoupling from China, any way in which we separate our economies, makes it marginally more likely that we go to war. And so therefore, we shouldn't have any decoupling at all. And so there's a wide range of debate. The Biden administration has taken a position essentially in the middle. Some economic decoupling, they call it small yard, high fence. We'll keep our economic relationship with the majority of things, but there'll be few key technologies that we cut China off from. But it remains to be seen whether we can actually integrate this into a full deterrence strategy for the country. But that's the job of the committee. So that's my quick world tour of peril to cheer you up for the holidays. But I think it's important that we start there because the stakes really are very high around the globe. And as we're sitting comfortably here in Massachusetts, a beautiful fall day, it's important to remember that the work that we do means a lot to people all over the globe, and ultimately will mean a lot to ensuring that our children can live in a peaceful world as we have been fortunate to enjoy by and large, and not a war that's further engulfed in conflict. All right, so now I will turn it over to you for your questions. And as I said, happy to debate any of the sort of strategic level foreign policy stuff that I discussed here, but also happy to take it in a totally different direction.
Congressman, thanks for your comments. Joe Donovan, a lobbyist and advocate for the Massachusetts and New England defense sector. I think we can all admit, according to what we all know, Congressman's comment, our defense sector is in a much better position than our football team. Before we get going with some questions for some of the people here on the roundtable that represent small business, research and development labs, higher education institutions, and our military installations, can you briefly talk about the town hall that you host annually? I think this is your 9th annual, and also how, in many ways, that town hall for veterans has become a model?
Sure. So every Veterans Day, I now host a Veterans Town Hall, starting I think in 2015 when I was first elected. This is an idea popularized by Sebastian Junger, author of some important books about war, but you probably know him as the author of Perfect Storm, the movie about Gloucester. And he talked about how it would be great on Veterans Day, rather than just going to a parade or a ceremony, to actually sit down with veterans and talk about their experiences, to try to help bridge that divide between veterans and everyone else, all the communities that we fought to protect. We risked our lives to defend. This idea, it was not Sebastian's. This idea came from Native American or American Indian tradition, where warriors would return to their tribe and have these ceremonies where they shared their experiences. The idea is not just cathartic for veterans, but that it helps the community understand, okay, this is what, speaking as a veteran, this is what I went through, and this is how it's impacted my life ever since. I think we're all, as veterans, very fortunate to live in a time in America when veterans are appreciated and supported, even if you don't agree with the wars that we fight in. But so few have served, just such a small percentage of Americans have served today, that people just don't know how to relate. Hey, I want to support veterans, but I don't even know where to start. So we give each veteran 10 minutes to get up, tell a quick story that something happened overseas and how it's affected your life back home. And the majority of attendees at these town halls are, just private citizens who just come in and want to, that's doing their part on Veterans Day. It's been incredibly moving, and a lot of my colleagues in Congress have taken this model now all over the country. So all over the country now on Veterans Day, there are veterans town halls, including multiple town halls in Massachusetts. It's one of the things I'm most proud of starting in Congress, because I really think it's helping to heal this divide between veterans and everybody else in America.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff.
Joe Coons, you run a small business here in Massachusetts, now part of a larger small business. But can you talk about what it's like to run that business here in Massachusetts in the defense sector and the legacy and the history?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman, for your time this morning and also for your service. So ARA has been around for 6 years. We've been providing antennas and antenna systems since that time for electronic scattering, supplied counter IED crew antennas for your colleagues in Iraq and Afghanistan, and more recently antenna systems for counter UAS and things of that nature. I actually had a question rather than a comment, Joe. Given your comments earlier on deterrence and the two active conflicts and hopefully the potential one that never happens, as a small business, what do you think we can do as small businesses to act and be a part of that deterrence? And all, not just the military part, but the economic part and everything else that you were mentioning. Because I think, there's a lot of talk out there about, machine learning, AI, the next generation of stuff. And also what you're seeing right now and how many munitions and stuff that have been used in the current conflicts, and just the numbers don't add up too.
Right.
But, how do you see small businesses, playing in that field into the future?
Well, I think small businesses are essential because the name of the game in defense right now is modernization, right? So don't get carried away by the number of 155 artillery rounds being shot between Russia and Ukraine that are basically killing a lot of people and not doing anything to advance the lines in one direction or another. It's all about innovation in modernization, right? I mean, the innovations that are happening on the ground in drone warfare in Ukraine right now are incredible. And our troops are not training to that standard. Right? The Ukrainian army is more advanced with drone warfare than our Army or Marine Corps. That's a real problem for us. They're actually much more experienced with, all the stuff that you deal with, counter UAS, counter jamming, and all of that, because they're operating at a much higher level with those kinds of that kind of combat environment than our troops are training right now. So you're bringing the innovation. The question is, how do we make sure that it gets out to the troops, right? And that they're adopting your technologies, not only to deter conflict, to show China that, hey, we have this stuff, so don't try, you don't think you're going to get away with your conventional invasion of Taiwan, but also because we just need to actually have our troops training to that standard, right? So I asked this question actually we had a hearing on Replicator. Many of you probably have heard of Replicator. Kath Hicks, Deputy Secretary of Defense, put forward this really a bold and ambitious plan to sort of break the traditional contracting model with DoD and get a large number of attritable systems, so low cost, high volume, semi-autonomous or autonomous systems that they can deploy rapidly, which obviously those are all things that we know DoD is not very good at. So they came in and gave a briefing to our committee, and I just made this point about how Ukraine is really leading the way in drone warfare. They're innovating on the ground, and I would love to say that all of our support has helped them innovate, but we're just trying to teach them like 1950s tactics, infantry tactics, and they're the ones who should be teaching us about innovations in drone warfare. So my simple question was, at what point is Replicator going to essentially get us to where Ukraine is today? And the answer was, at the current pace, never. That's a real problem, right? And so, yes, it is largely on us in Congress to help DoD drive requirements to speed up all of this process of adapting innovation. But I think it's also up to you in the small business community to really be pushing these technologies on DoD and not just trying to sell us the old stuff that's easy to contract for, but the real innovative stuff that's going to keep our troops safe and well-trained for what they might encounter in the battlefield in the future.
Joe Ferraro, MITRE. A week ago, MITRE had a major announcement for their Blue Tech Lab and the state's blue economy. Can you talk about that and also MITRE's role with respect to, again, blue economy as it relates to national security?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Congressman, thank you very much for attending that event and taking the stage with us. It was an awesome presentation and ceremony that you were part of. I think that is an exemplar. A lot of the focus of that blue tech is both from a kind of fishing industries, but also what does it mean for Navy? What does it mean for autonomous vehicles, right? And as you said, a lot of these drones and capabilities are advancing very quickly. Where can we have a range, maybe in New England, that focuses on autonomy from a defensive perspective or an offensive perspective? And how do we get these economies of scale? There's been most recent legislation around the executive order for autonomy, the safety and aspect of that. We know that China is probably not going to approach it the same way. They're going to go after whatever they need to do to be effective, where our conscience is what holds us back in many cases. So I do think there is an opportunity for the New England area writ large to kind of double down on autonomy. We have a lot of smart minds. How do we bring all these small and large companies together to integrate more effectively in an autonomous perspective? But where do you see it on the Hill and kind of your day-to-day conversations? Where do you see the energy going around that topic?
Sure. So first of all, congratulations again on opening the Blue Lab. I was glad to be the backup quarterback when Senator Markey canceled. Not very controversial backup quarterback. We sort of filled in smoothly there, but it was a great panel discussion, and it's a great opportunity for not just MITRE, but really for this whole defense ecosystem to take advantage of that facility and innovate underwater, where we know we have a lot to do. Right? We're very proud of how good our subs are. We love how good our subs are. We have the best subs in the world, right? But it's a real problem if we think that that's just the future, that our adversaries are not going to say, okay, we're probably not going to catch up to the U.S. in building multi-billion-dollar subs, so we're just going to build a lot of small autonomous subs that can kill, that can find and kill multi-billion-dollar subs, right? It's very hard to find our ballistic missile submarines right now. Very hard to find. You can either solve that problem by building an incredibly sophisticated, extraordinarily expensive attack submarine with the technology able to find that thing, or you can just build thousands and thousands of really small things to spread out all over the place where you think it might be, and one of them has the luck to come upon it, right? So this is the reality of the future underwater, and of course it's already in many ways the reality that we're seeing on land. The issue that you alluded to, which is that we will be morally constrained and China will not, certainly applies to Russia as well, is a major issue for us. It's a major issue for us in the future of warfare. And for those of you who don't understand what I'm alluding or what I'm referring to here, is the fact that I am not at all concerned about the ethical and moral restrictions that we're going to place on our robots. We will do that. I'm confident we will do that. We already are. What I'm very concerned is the lack of restrictions on our enemy robots, right? Because if you gave a killer robot something that's right on the horizon to Vladimir Putin today, you were selling it to him, and you said, this is going to save you a lot of manpower because this robot will go in and clear a building so you don't have to send troops in. He says, well, how effective is it? He says, well, it's about, only 20% of them are going to get killed. But by the way, if you just flip this switch so it doesn't care about shooting innocent civilians and just kills everything in its path, then only 5% of them get killed. What do you think Putin's going to do? He's going to flip that switch. He's already just bombing Ukrainian civilians for the sport of it. But we're not going to do that. That puts our robots literally at a disadvantage compared to authoritarian countries that are not constrained by collateral damage or civilian casualties and the restrictions that democracy have on preventing those. So that means that we have got to not just win the AI race here in developing these defense technologies, but set the standards globally for its use. And that's why I have been very vocal in advocating for essentially a Geneva Conventions around AI. The stuff that you see coming out of the tech industry right now in collaboration with the White House, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is not addressing this problem. Voluntary restrictions that US companies agree to put on each other or themselves mean nothing when it comes to this problem with what Chinese robots might do to our own. So we have to quickly internationalize this. The first time that this was really ever discussed was just a month ago or so at Bletchley Park, an AI summit in the UK. That was encouraging to see it at least on the table. But we're way behind in setting these rules. And it's actually currently DoD and administration policy that we do not want to enter into any agreements that impose restrictions on us. I think that is incredibly dumb. I think it's incredibly dumb. Because if we don't set the restrictions now and show our adversaries that at this very moment in time, because our AI is a little bit more advanced, we're willing to take a bigger hit, then we're going to be in real trouble down the road because of the scenario that we're discussing. So this is a very complicated issue, but I think it's incredibly important. And the last comment I'll make is this, as soon as scientists, like how many of you have seen Oppenheimer? It's a good movie if you haven't seen it. As soon as scientists like Robert Oppenheimer developed the nuclear bomb, they almost immediately embarked on a worldwide campaign to limit its use. It was led by many of the scientists themselves. Say, this is incredibly dangerous technology. I'm very worried about my legacy for having invented this. We've got to make sure this doesn't blow up the planet. That's not happening with AI. And so when I think about my 2-year-old and 5-year-old and the world that they're going to inherit, this is one of my biggest concerns. It's one of my biggest concerns for the national security of the United States, but just literally the future of our planet, is that AI could end human life on Earth if it's not restricted in how it's used in warfare.
Christine Nolan, I want to bring you into the conversation because Stephanie had referenced the Mass Tech Collaborative, where you are, Mass MEP, but maybe you or Ben could talk about the resources that are available or what Mass Tech is doing relative to national security, particularly helping small companies as well as our colleges and universities.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. We'll probably tag team this one. We might talk for a few minutes here, so please bear with us. So just quickly, thank you to Chancellor Chen for hosting us, Stephanie and the Middlesex 3 for organizing this, and Congressman Moulton for spending your morning with us and talking about these important topics. So my name is Ben Linville-Engler. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Investment Strategist for the Mass Tech Collaborative, one of the state's economic development agencies. And our mission is to strengthen the competitiveness of the technology and innovation economy here in the Commonwealth. We look at national security as part of economic security, which creates economic opportunity, which is why it fits within our portfolio as economic development. For defense and security, we take a very integrated approach. As you can imagine, the technology and innovation ecosystem in the Commonwealth, there's a lot going on here. We were able to partner and help fund part of the MITRE Blue Tech Lab, which was a great event for those of you that weren't there, but also a host of other facilities or equipment across the Commonwealth, including the Nexus Center across the hall, which I always take a moment to remind people it is a cool name, it has a cool meaning, but it's also an acronym. It stands for New England Cross US. So how do we bring to bear the technology and innovations we have here in New England for the United States? We have 6 divisions that we're organized around. I'm going to just talk about a couple of them for those of you in the room that aren't familiar with us. Christine is our director for our Center for Advanced Manufacturing, where we have a host of programs for next generation production technology support, capital, risk capital to support small, medium manufacturers to bring on new production equipment, and a pretty big portfolio of talent and workforce programs. We also fund through our Innovation Institute early stage collaborative research with academic institutions, and this is where, again, that defense and security component is important because we can connect with our researchers to bring in some of those requirements that may be different than the commercial side. We also have our Mass Cyber Center, which focuses on economic security from a cybersecurity perspective, do a lot of work with municipalities, and Christine will probably take a moment to talk about a new program we're starting with manufacturers. But I think where I've met most of you in this room is I also have the great pleasure of serving as the acting director for the Northeast Microelectronics Coalition Hub, which, Congressman, really appreciative of you and your colleagues' work on the CHIPS and Science Act. We've been working tirelessly, I think quite seriously, for the last 18 months to try to bring home some of those dollars here to Massachusetts and the region, but to also bring to bear what we have here to support some of those economic deterrent positions that we're looking to take. And so for many of you in this room that have been part of our Northeast Microelectronics Coalition, we have been designated as a Microelectronics Commons Hub by the Department of Defense, funded through the CHIPS Act. We're one of 8 hubs nationally, and we're currently implementing and launching our hub that includes a number of ecosystem and workforce programs really targeted at microelectronics, also includes some photonics and quantum technology programs. But it's not just focused on Massachusetts, which this is an important distinguishing part of our mission at Mass Tech and our hub, is we have over 100, or about 150 organizations as members right now for the Northeast region. So if you think about the strengths that we have in Massachusetts, but we couple that with some other regional strengths, we know many of the companies in this room have talent and workforce that cross state borders. We have a really unique role to play right now in this sort of level between federal government and state government as this regional defense microelectronics organization. So we'll have plenty more out on that soon. I know many of you are part of our coalition. Christine and I will be here and can talk more specifically about opportunities there. And we have a host of colleagues that are here to help you, specifically if you're Massachusetts-based companies, to engage on some of these specific programs we have to support you.
Great.
Christine, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Ben. That's great information. Just to let you know, we will send everybody who's registered this information and other resources as well, too, so you can forward it on to other people in your company or follow up with people. And I know we've got a lot of great companies and resources along the table and outside throughout the room. So I do want to open the questions up to everybody at the table. But I think, Joe, if I can start with you as well, too, that'd be great. And please introduce yourself before.
Sure. Joe Bradley from the Hanscom Air Force Base, Director of Engineering there. Congressman, thank you for coming. Doc, thank you, and Stephanie, but also everybody here for coming out today. You know, this is taking time for your schedule, so coming out for this is great. Congressman, you talked a lot about AI, right? And, you know, we recently had an executive order that was signed out by the president. The challenge with executive orders are they're great, but they're not worth the paper they're written on because the next administration can rescind them. Is Congress looking at doing anything? And the reason I ask is, as we, you know, either in the defense industry or our educational partners or even the industries start to advance and invest in AI, is there going to be a follow-through and a continuum beyond there? Is Congress considering doing anything about ratifying that that executive order, and can you talk a little bit about, did it go far enough? Is there more to do? You know, is there educational dollars associated with it so we can actually build that workforce of the future?
So just a few months ago, we had a big debate in Congress on whether to ban TikTok or not. This was Congress's attempt to catch up with the rest of the world and regulate social media. Social media was invented, as we know it today, maybe around 2003, 2004. So we're only 20 years behind. I'm not optimistic that Congress is going to be able to get its act together to actually regulate AI in any meaningful way. I think we're going to be perpetually behind the rest of the world, including the European Union. And I don't say that proudly. I'm just being a realist here. So my argument has been that Congress just realistically is not going to be able to proactively regulate AI. We're never going to be able to keep up with the industry. We're already 20 years behind with social media, which is another thing that we should have some regulations for, right? Especially for kids. So what we need to do is just focus on these edge cases that are most dangerous. And this is the argument that I was just talking about and answering another Joe's question. There's a lot of Joes here today, the whole lineup here. At least we put them together. And I wrote a piece in the Boston Globe, maybe in the spring or something like that, about making this argument that let's focus on the most dangerous places. That's where we need to use our regulatory muscle, because they could literally end life on this planet if we don't address them more carefully. But if you're just looking for general guidance about AI, I wouldn't wait on Congress.
Congressman, thanks for joining us today. Chancellor Chen, thank you. Stephanie. I'm Tony Corpinas. I'm Vice President of Engineering at Draper Lab. I'm going to take us in another direction, but it's very relevant, and it's the biodefense side of things. The government just published the National Biodefense Strategy. We're all coming off the back end of a pandemic in the endemic phase now of a virus that was unintentionally pushed out into the world. And there's, when you talk about the strategic deterrence and the modernization of the nuclear triad that's going on today, there's another deterrence we've got to start thinking about in the biological side of things also, where you can equate it to how do you get left of launch, okay, for a biological event? How do you go out and sense and get knowledge of what is happening in the world ahead, unintentional or intentional, and then how do you react after an event occurs quickly enough to minimize the damage? So I'm interested in your thoughts and where Congress's thoughts are in a national biodefense area.
Well, just to extend the analogy with nuclear defense, one of the reasons that nuclear deterrence is effective is because we have a lot of resources to immediately detect a nuclear launch on the other side, right? So Russia knows that they can't get away with preemptively launching a bunch of missiles against us because we're going to know immediately that happened, right? We don't have that capability with biotech. We don't have any sort of surveillance system, right? And yet some of these technologies were really developed and refined because of the pandemic. So we started testing, wastewater coming off of planes that land at Logan Airport to see if anything's coming over from other parts of the planet. But we've given a pittance of funding to this, and a lot of it has dried up with the end of the sort of pandemic phase, I guess you would say. I'm not a bio warrior myself with COVID. And so I think I think you're right, Tony. This is a big oversight. It's something that we need to get on top of. And this is going to be another big threat. When I co-chaired the Future Defense Task Force back in 2020, and we looked at 20, 30 years, what are the big threats? The two we talked about the most were AI. For 3 years, we felt like we were screaming into the wilderness and no one would listen. We were saying the exact same things we're saying today about AI that we just talked about. But of course, it wasn't until ChatGPT got out there that people actually started taking it seriously. The other big thing we talked about was bio. And it's not just traditional biowarfare like you're describing. It's also the fact that you can use biotechnology to just do very advanced manufacturing of super, super small things, for example, right? So you might be able to just develop some really important defense technologies or surveillance technologies, for example, that don't look like, it's not like about, giving people smallpox or something like that. But there's a whole other dimension of biotech that can be useful for defense that most people aren't even thinking about right now.
Paul Ferraro, obviously everyone knows Raytheon's role in protecting the nation, protecting the world. But can you give us some updates relative to, obviously, the conflicts that the Congressman talked about and just some of the things that Raytheon is doing and working on?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Congressman, thank you for being here. So, Congressman, you mentioned in your earlier remarks some of the lessons learned from either Ukraine or Israel, which are many. Now, working at Raytheon, we provide many of the weapons programs, weapons systems that have been provided to Ukraine in particular. And those lessons that we've learned are like I said, are many. The good news is I think the weapons systems that we provided have been incredibly effective, which is great. However, we've also learned that the rate at which they can be depleted out of inventory is arguably much greater than we had perhaps anticipated. The time it takes to replenish those inventories is perhaps much longer than we would have anticipated. We have obsolescence issues that need to be accounted for, and what we'd like to have the elasticity in our supply base and in our manufacturing capabilities to respond at will, we truly don't, is what we're finding. That extends well beyond the walls of a Raytheon, but into our supply base and our partners. The vast majority of our spend is through our supply base. Then you also mentioned the asymmetry that we're seeing with drone warfare, and that's just a new threat space that we perhaps were not anticipating, at least not how prevalent it's being used in these conflicts. So we really need to improve our ability to bring in innovation, to bring in the capabilities of our small business partners, and perhaps provide some of that conduit to government contracting that a large company like Raytheon can provide. How do you see us responding to these lessons learned so that we can be more responsive, be it to the elasticity of the supply base, the inclusion of new warfighting techniques, innovation techniques, as well as simply just modernization of our weapons programs and our ability to continue to produce them at rate, at scale, when needed?
Well, Paul, you've hit on some incredibly important issues and a number of them, so let me try to cover wave tops here. But first of all, the good news is that, just to take the Patriot as an example that we all know, the Patriot has exceeded expectations. I mean, it's done things that we didn't anticipate that it could do, or that people weren't sure it could do, with going up against weapon systems that didn't even exist when the Patriot was designed, for example. The bad news is that for 3 decades, Russia didn't really know what the Patriot could do, and now they know exactly, and they're testing it every single day. And so even with a system like Patriot that's been remarkably successful and we're very proud of, we're going to have to increase the pace of modernization, right? But you also talked about how we just can't even produce enough of them to just resupply Ukraine today. This is a major issue with deterrence in the Pacific. We just don't have the what we call the magazine depth of missiles that we need to fight and win this conflict, and therefore convince China that it's a bad idea to start with the production rates we have right now for a lot of just basic missiles, for example. A war in the Pacific would largely be a missile war. We're not going to be shooting 155 artillery from Guam to China, right? So we need more missiles to be effective at convincing China you're going to lose if you start this war. And it comes back to all these issues. We have defense companies that say we can't produce them fast enough. In large part, that's due to suppliers that have become restricted. There was a 60 Minutes piece that some of you might not like, exposing how much consolidation has hurt the defense industry and hurt our ability to defend the country, because you used to have a lot of competition for parts for these weapon systems. That competition has been taken out of the system. So what has to happen is a sort of give and take here, where obviously the U.S. DOD and the Pentagon has to do a lot of work to modernize its acquisition strategy. I'm a co-chair of the Tiger Task Force that's looking specifically at how we get weapons more quickly to Taiwan, but hopefully we'll learn some lessons that apply across the defense industry. Mike Waltz and I are co-chairing that. We're just sort of working behind the scenes, but we're really digging into specific with foreign military sales. Why is this taking so long to get Taiwan the things that they need? But there also has to be some recognition, I think, on industry's part that you have a role to play too. And we all know that when the U.S. was able to take Ford and GM plants and start producing aircraft in World War II, that wasn't just because, Roosevelt's Pentagon, which didn't even this time, Roosevelt's War Department had a really innovative acquisition strategy that they suddenly sent out to the country. It's because everybody stepped up and played a part. And companies took some financial hit to do the right thing for our national security, to speed up production. So there has to be a give and take here. And I think this is the conversation that we need to have a bit more explicitly between Congress and DOD and companies like Raytheon. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Joe Thomas,
Morning.
yet another Joe. I should have been sitting over there somewhere. But anyway, sir, as you know, we're a small business. We do GPS jamming and GPS anti-jamming type capabilities. So one of the things that we're looking at is when are we start going to look at providing anti-jam capability for critical infrastructure? So we've seen some attacks in the last couple of years. We saw the Denver airport go down for almost 48 hours. We saw Dallas-Fort Worth go down because of a GPS attack for almost a week. It was estimated like $6 billion a day was lost because you just can't land aircraft. And then, of course, just last week, we saw jamming out in San Antonio and Stillwater, Oklahoma, most likely cartel activity. So we're starting to see some homegrown attacks, not necessarily from U.S. citizens, but maybe from infiltration or some other type of threat vector. One of the things we've tried to do was reach out to the Department of Transportation to see if they, for seaport protection, for airport protection, even rail stations, nuclear power plants, all the different infrastructure. We're just not getting any kind of movement. It's almost like we want to ignore what's happening at home. What can we do to break through some of those things? Because we do see, a lot of, and you've probably seen it, a lot of relaxation on the ITAR side of the house to allow us to supply everybody else. But we can't supply ourselves with our own capability to defend ourselves from threat actors.
Well, the quick answer to your question is I agree with you that this is a major issue, and I'd be more than happy to write a letter to DOT to highlight this issue and maybe force a response because, it's, in my book, unacceptable that they're not looking at this risk and taking it more seriously. So if that is indeed the case, I can help you push that with my office. But, just to hammer home on this point, this is another thing that we just didn't have to worry about for a long time. When we invaded Iraq back in 2003, we were told the Iraqis have access to some Russian technology. They may be able to jam GPSs. That's why you're going to get issued this, multi-ton GPS thing that's not really handheld, but that's what they called it at the time. And yet, like probably the piece of gear that I used more than almost anything else in Iraq was my little handheld Garmin that I, got. I don't know, at some store, before I deployed, right? And I used that all the time to actually navigate my way to help invade this country. So it really wasn't a concern back then. And yet now, as you explained, this is happening every day. In fact, embedded in my remarks about, just our bad options if China invades Taiwan, I said, look, if we just say, hey, we're not going to play and we let China take over, this is going to be a real economic hit to the country. And I was hosting a dinner party not too long ago where I made this point and I brought out some numbers, some economic statistics about how much it would impact our economy to just basically let China go ahead and take Taiwan, and it really wasn't hitting home. And then I just said, but if this actually gets to the conflict stage where they take out our GPS, because a lot of people think that a conflict, even before we decide not to get involved, would begin with China just taking out a lot of our satellites, then that means that a lot of you would not be able to use GPS to drive home tonight. And that all of a sudden got everyone's attention. That's what the point where they said, this is a real problem for my life, forget these statistics. So this is a reality. This is absolutely a reality. And there is a lot of innovation going on behind the scenes to try to address this from a technical perspective, stuff that I'm sure you're familiar with. But we got a long way to go to catch up with the world today. And it's becoming increasingly easy for, you basically, with the right knowledge on the internet and a few $100s worth of equipment, you can spoof a satellite today. That's a frightening prospect. Okay, 3 more questions. I don't know. Billy. Yes? Okay. He's the boss. Sorry, Rick, my poor chief of staff sitting over here wondering why I didn't look at him.
Okay, sorry about that. Congressman, thanks for serving in Congress, first of all. I think that's really important
Thank you.
because we need more people like you in Congress. I lead a small company of about 750 people. We do about half of our work is 6163 budget authority work, some more S&T type stuff, and then the other half is production and current support operations. Almost all the work is classified work. So it was a big deal to us a couple of years ago after the cyber attack on OPM when they moved the clearance process from OPM back to DOD. Suddenly or not suddenly, but over a reasonably short period of time, the clearance delays went from years in some cases down to months. And that's a big deal for us because we need to be able to hire people and either get them in front of a terminal or into a lab doing that work. I think it's a big success story, and it's a reason for hope that maybe there's other places that we could reduce some of the delays in getting people moved along in the process to actually doing productive work for the DoD and IC. Do you have any other sense of how Congress might help remove other barriers of that sort and just help us move more quickly through the administrative and bureaucratic things that are important and necessary to get us to actually doing productive work for people?
You know, the Pentagon needs an active board of directors, and if Congress is functioning correctly, we're supposed to be sitting on the House Armed Services Committee, part of the board of directors for DoD, to try to figure out okay, let's just step back and look strategically at the situation, like a good board for your company would do, and say, are we really investing in the right things, or are we really focused on the right priorities? And, you know, let's ask some tough questions about how operations are going and root out inefficiencies, right? So I was overseas on a CODEL a few months back looking at one of our missile defense sites in Europe that's, I think, 2 years behind coming online. And they said, oh, well, we've got this sorted out now. We've got a plan. It's going to be, I don't remember the exact dates, but essentially, you know, this thing is going to be operational, ready to go OIC in March, but then it actually won't be online until June. So what's happening between March and June? It says, well, the contract will be finished with construction in March, but then it goes into a maintenance period. So why would you have a maintenance period right when you open? It doesn't sound right to me. So, well, the problem is that, you know, all the technology that we're putting into this thing, you know, because this thing is so behind, this contract's so behind, it's a couple years out of date. So after we get it done, we got to upgrade the technology. I said, well, look, I want to know the number, the dollar amount, the cost to taxpayers that you are spending installing the old system so that as soon as your contract is done, you can rip it out before it's ever been used and install the new system. But that conversation wouldn't have even happened if I hadn't been there on that Armed Services Committee to ask those tough questions. Because the way the military bureaucracy works, those tough questions don't get asked today, or they certainly don't get asked enough. I haven't gone on a CODEL in months because of the dysfunction in Washington, because of the Republican Civil War that left us without a Speaker of the House for 3 weeks. Haven't been home either, but the point is that a lot of this oversight work is not happening if you don't have a properly functioning Congress. So I'm not saying that Congress is the panacea here, but Congress, when it works correctly, does actually help with these things. And I was actually the ranking member of the subcommittee on oversight that was overseeing this transition a few years ago from OPM to DoD. We held hearings every month to check in on this, on how the progress was going. I'm delighted to hear your experience has been very positive. It hasn't been perfect, but Congress, as much as people are frustrated with Congress right now, and everyone loves to hate on Congress, it's important to remember your point, which is that we do need good people to go to Congress, because in some cases, this is Congress's job. And DoD is not going to reform on its own. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, Maggie Lorezos from Northrop Grumman, and I am not a Joe. That's why I'm on this side, right? Thank you very much for attending and for hosting this amazing event. It's awesome to be able to share with all of you all the great stuff that's going on in the local region. I have a question to you about Coalition Joint All-Domain Command and Control. That's a DoD effort that is very important to the folks at Hanscom, and probably there's a lot of folks that are contributing to it, from the small businesses, innovation, in the different companies around here, because I see it as the path to artificial intelligence. The problem, though, is the way our acquisition system is set up, because it was Vietnam era, it's very stovepipe. When you're trying to integrate across all of them, it's hard to do. China doesn't have that disadvantage. They tell who the winners are, they pick, who's going to play together, and off they go. So what are your thoughts on CJAD, C2, and also the acquisition system, and how we can make it so that we can actually compete with this adversary?
Well, I'm going to answer this question sort of at a strategic level rather than going into the details of this particular system. To just say that I think the big picture problem here is that the DoD acquisition system, which is sort of Vietnam, I guess it's Vietnam based, but was really designed sort of in the Vietnam period to deal with, sort of up until that point. So it's maybe, my point is it's maybe even older than Vietnam, is really focused on acquiring hardware, because that's what we acquired back then. And what we need to do is have an acquisition system that's built on acquiring software. So I had a meeting just a week ago with the Army guys who are looking at the future airborne reconnaissance requirements. So what sort of, what is the future of airborne reconnaissance, rotary wing reconnaissance, right? And I asked this question pretty early on in the discussion, why are you developing a manned helicopter? And it seems to me like, why couldn't we just do this with drones or whatnot? I said, well, we looked at this question, and MITRE told us, call you out. This is what they said. They said, MITRE told us that the technology to do this autonomously is not going to be available for 10 years. Okay. So in the meantime, we've got to have a manned version of this helicopter. So then my next question is, based on your current acquisition plan, when are you going to field this new helicopter? Oh, we're going to field it in 7 years. Great. So you're going to have a helicopter we spend billions of dollars on that's going to be obsolete 3 years later. Now, of course, the Army pushed back and said it's more complicated than that. But that's kind of the gist of things, right? And they assured me, they said, well, the thing is, though, we're getting all this stuff, and it's going to be platform agnostic or whatever. Like, we're really focused on what the cameras are and what the technology is. And, right now the computers are really big, so they need to go on this manned vehicle. But if we can get something smaller, then maybe they can go on an autonomous vehicle. The whole point was that what they should be doing is acquiring the software, all that technology, all that surveillance stuff, and not be focused on what platform it rides on, right? The focus should be, how do we do reconnaissance, not what sort of helicopter do we build to carry this stuff. So that's a practical example that's, I think, very much at the intersection between hardware and software, where we just need to make that transition. Our focus should not be on just getting a helicopter. It should be focused on what's the stuff that needs to ride on any platform. How do we make sure we acquire the right stuff, the right technology, essentially, to figure out what's going on out there, which is much more about the processing of images than it is about the acquisition of images. We all have very sophisticated cameras in our pockets. But what we need to do is be able to interpret that image. That's software. That should be the focus of our acquisition plan for Army reconnaissance. And then we just make sure that it can ride on, You know, maybe we have a couple of different companies produce different platforms, some manned, some unmanned, that this could ride on, and we take the best one, right? So that's a huge transition that we need to make at DoD. And, you know, we still got a lot of progress to make. One more question.
Apologize, mine's a bit of a two-part question. I'm Maren Katnar. I have a new semiconductor company called Semiconducts. I'm with BMNT and formerly was with Northrop and MIT. So first part of the comment, kind of to get into the questions, is you talked about 3 conflicts. You didn't talk about the conflict that we're seeing on our borders, and it ties into defense because the National Guard has been called up to support that effort. So it ties into the entrance and exit of human capital to our country. And when I see what's coming across the border, we're not tracking everything that's coming in, and it's causing national security implications for our critical infrastructure and other areas. So first part of the question is kind of how are you playing a role in our border security, because the budgets for Ukraine and Israel are far outpacing what we're seeing for our border security. Second part of the question is we talked a little bit about biotechnology. And if you think about what China has in terms of hypersonics, they're, in some ways, if you read the Wall Street Journal, they're saying that they're outpacing us. So part of that technology, not only was it stolen through IP theft, but it's also because we have this grand exodus of human capital from our top colleges and universities. I'm looking at Dr. Chen here. MIT, a huge percentage of their graduate students and postdoc students are foreign. And the challenge is for those students to actually stay in country, and if any are ultimately able to work in the defense sector, it takes years and years and years. So what are you doing from an immigration policy to help keep some of this top technical talent to support our national security and defense infrastructure?
Sure. So those are great questions that actually do come up with surprising frequency on the China Committee. The problem is that we think about them in the reverse order of importance. One of the most important things that we can do for our national security is change our immigration policy. Because you're absolutely right. We bring all these talented people from all over the world, including a lot from China. We educate them at the best universities with the latest and greatest technology, and then we send them back home to work for our adversaries. That's a major, major problem for our national security. So putting aside, you know, our history of immigration, whatever is written on the Statue of Liberty, all these different moral arguments for why immigration is important, not to mention the fact that you can't go to a restaurant in my hometown on Sunday or Monday because they just can't hire the people to work there. And we have a major national security issue with immigration. Now, there's also a national security issue with the fact that our border is insecure, and I'm not a Democrat who's going to, you know, play around with that. That is an issue. It's not nearly as big as an issue as the immigration piece. And I didn't mention it as a conflict because, frankly, there are, you know, I've mentioned what I think are the top 3 conflicts in the globe today. And there's about 20 others that would come before we talk about I mean, does anyone have an idea what's going on in Burma right now? It's absolutely disgraceful, and we don't talk about it at all. Thousands and thousands of people being killed, right? So sadly, we live in a world where there are a lot of conflicts, and I only picked the top 3. But in terms of addressing the national security impacts of our failed immigration policy, this is a real problem. And the reality is that serious people are not that concerned about, you know, infiltrators coming over the border because they can't come over the southern border. They're going to get to us some other way. But it is an issue, and as a political reality, we're only going to fix the immigration problem that is a major problem for our national security if we also address the border security problem, because those two have to go hand in hand. And that fundamentally is why you will see people like me say, I'm not just going to vote for unilateral money to strengthen the border, which is a really big national security issue if you watch Fox News, but is not as big a national security issue if you actually spend some time at the border, as I have, because it has to be tied to immigration reform, which is actually a much bigger national security issue because it affects our competitiveness all around the globe. The reality is that that kind of immigration reform, strengthening the border, improving border security, along with reforming our immigration process to encourage more people to come here legally, discouraging people from coming here illegally, That's a political deal that's actually not that complicated, right? It's not that hard to see the trade-offs here. There are some complications, like the fact that I'm a big fan of E-Verify. I think that you should have to verify that the people you're hiring are legal. That sounds like something that conservatives would want, but all the conservative farmers are against it because they don't want to have to verify that their illegal workforce is not illegal, right? So there are some political complications, but the basic outlines of this, which are Democrats want immigration reform, Republicans want border security, shouldn't be that difficult. The political challenge is that the Republicans who control the House right now see this as a politically winning issue if the border is broken. And so they don't want to agree to any reform. And if you look at the history of immigration reform, while there's been problems on the left and the right with coming to the table on these agreements, it's always been the conservative Republicans who've shot it down, right? George W. Bush tried to do immigration reform, Republican Congress refused to pass it. We had a bill on the table a few years ago, Republican Congress wouldn't do it. So I hope that we can change that political reality, and I do think that the national security argument is a really important piece of the puzzle.
So much more we could talk about, but we're already over time. So if I may, I'd like to end this roundtable portion of it and ask if everyone could help me to thank Congressman Moulton for leading today's conversation. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you for having me. And I hope I didn't depress people too much with the reality of the globe today. There's a lot to be concerned about. But look, the exciting thing is that there are a lot of people in the room today who can make a difference here and are so important to our defense, our innovation. And my team, my office really stand by to support you in that effort. Not just because I work for many of you as your representative or as your adjacent representative if you're not exactly in my district, but because it's so important, the work that you do, the innovation that you bring to our DoD is so important for our national security. And that's fundamentally why I came to Congress, right? I felt like I saw the consequences of failed leadership in Iraq from Washington, right? Or I should say the consequences of failed Washington leadership on the ground in Iraq. That's fundamentally why I ran in the first place. And that still animates why I come to work every day, even though one of the most frequent questions I get from my friends is, Seth, why the hell do you keep putting up with this? Why do you keep doing this? So you're really important to our national security, and therefore you're really important to me and my team. So don't hesitate to be in touch. Don't hesitate to continue being in touch if you haven't already. I'll remember the letter I promised to write. And there's a lot of good work we can do together. So thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you for coming, and also thank you for hiring Tom Arsenault. He has been fabulous. Where are you, Tom? Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to embarrass you.
How much did he pay you to say that?
But if we can end this part of the conversation, but if you're able to stick around, we've got more coffee, more food. Please eat some of it because I don't want it to go to waste. But we can continue this conversation as well too, even after the roundtable is over. And Joe Donovan, thank you for helping to moderate through the conversation. And again, we're going to send everybody a follow-up email. If you are a resource and you want to be part of that email, please send me your information so we can distribute it to everybody who's in the room today. So once again, thank you all. Thank you, Congressman. And thank you. And thank you.
Joe, thanks a lot.